Now, what is going on, guys? Today we are going to take a look at Winston, what it is, why you need it, and why you might consider it for your Node.js application, and what advantages it has over console.log, for example. Well, let's maybe start with why you would actually consider using a external logging library like Winston in favor of something like console.log. So the thing is, with console.log, you can do a lot of things, right? You can write something to the console, you can log something with a certain logging level. So for example, you can log on the info level, on the warn level, and on the error level. So looks quite good, right? So why do you actually, or why would you even care about like an additional logging library? And the answer is that console.log only writes to the console. However, you might want to consider writing to a different location. So for example, you might want to consider to write to a file, or you might want to write to a log aggregator. And this is actually what this library here, Winston, allows you to do. So it's like a general purpose logger for Node. And it allows you to write to different sources. And you have very fine-grained control over where you write to. And the principle there is actually quite simple. So the idea is that you have a logger, and then you have an arbitrary amount of so-called transports. And these transports are basically locations where you write your log messages to. So for example, you can write to the console, but you can also write to a file. You might also write to HTTP, so like over the network, or to some log aggregator. And like this log aggregator, for example, like Datadog, but there's also others. This is very, very useful because if you have a lot of logs, they only become useful when you can search in them, and you know, when you can search for trace IDs and these kind of things. So Winston allows you to do all of that, and you can also have very fine-grained control over it. So for example, you can say, I want everything for the info, warning, and error level to be written to the console, but I want, I don't know, the debug logs to be written to a file. So you can do that, and then in addition, you want to write everything to Datadog or to some log aggregator. So this is totally possible with Winston. And yeah, Winston is probably like one of the most popular packages here. I just wanted to mention one more thing before we kind of go inside of the demo and before we see how it works. I just wanted to mention logging levels. So in general, and this is pretty much the same with any logger and with any technology, you have different log levels. And depending on the severity, well, the lower the log level is, the higher or the more severe the log is. So basically error is like pretty severe, right? That's why it has like a log level 0. So these are like NPM log levels. So there's also Java or like other technologies, like they might have different log levels. But in general, the principle is always the same. So error, for example, has like the lowest log level, and then you have warning, and then you have info. So you pretty much always have these three here at least. And the idea is that you can take a logger and you can set the log level globally. And then it will only log the log level and the ones below it. So for example, if you have an info logger, it will write out all messages for log.info, log.warn, and log.error. But if you have like log.debug, it's not going to log it out because the current level is set to info or below. And this is very useful because if you want to debug something, typically it's just a matter of like changing like an environment variable. You kind of set the log level to say debug, and then you get like more logs. So this is very useful when you're investigating some sort of bug. Yeah, so that's it pretty much as far as the concepts go. I would say let's just jump into the code and let's just see what we can do. Yeah, so before we get into Winston, let's just see how the default console log behaves. So I'm just going to run this code. So I have nodemon installed here. It's just like an empty project more or less, but with nodemon installed. So I have like hot reload. And you can see here that it basically outputs all the text. So hello, text info, text warn, text error. And that we can also log to different log levels, but that per default it's just not shown in the console. And if we log out an error, it actually, or it not only prints the text message, but also the stack trace. Cool, so this is just for reference, so that we compare it to how Winston is doing it. And what we need to do is we need to install this package first. And you can see here, okay, it's called Winston. So let's copy this. Let's go to your project and let's npm install this. Cool. And what I typically do is, in addition, I put the logger inside of a separate directory. And I'm going to say touch logger and then index.js. Yeah, let's maybe try to create the simplest possible logger in Winston. And the way what we need to do is we first need to import this package. And then in the documentation, you can already see like how to use it. So here's like one example. This one like already writes to 2 files. Yeah, let's maybe copy this example anyway. And let's just make the simplest possible logger out of this. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to remove these file transports because I don't want to write logs inside of like a file for now. I also removed this level info. We're going to get to that in a second. And they are doing JSON logging, which is fine. I'm just going to take simple. So they have like a simple built-in format. You can see it here, winston.format.simple. And yeah, that's quite decent. So I'm just going to take this one as well, just for starters. And the default metadata, I'm going to, maybe comment this out because we will probably get to it later. Okay, and the only thing we now need to specify is where do we actually want to write our logs to? And we want to write to the console. And what we can do is we can just create a new transport. So I can say winston.transports.console. Whoops. Yeah, that should be it. And let's try to export this. Exports logger, and that's our logger. So that's probably the simplest logger you can create. And I will just go here. I'm going to comment this out for now. And I will import like this logger. So I will say logger require logger. And then we can see. So Winston also offers these info, warn, error, and debug methods. So let's just try them out. I'm just going to say logger.info text info. Okay. And I will also say logger.warn text warn. And I will say logger.error text error. Okay, so let's try to run this and let's see what happens. So I'm just going to run npm run dev. Cool, and there you have it. So this is the simplest type of logger. So it basically prints the logging level, which is like different from the console info, right? Because there you don't see the level. And then it has a colon and then it prints the text. So that is fine. I just want to show you something else. So let's say I will do something like log.debug and say text debug. Oops, why is the log not there? Well, the answer is quite simple. As I've already mentioned, there's like different logging levels in this library. And per default, if you create a logger with this create logger method, the log level is set to info. That's why we deleted the line also as well, because it's a default. So that means if the log level is info or anything with a higher severity, so warning or error, it's going to actually write it to all the transports. At the moment, we only have one transport, which is like the console. And that's why you see the info, the warning, and the error text. But the debug level, as you can see here, is like higher than the info level. And that's why we're basically not writing it out. And one way to fix this would be to just take this, copy this, go to our logger, and then instead of making this error, we can say debug. Now, if we do debug, you can see the log actually appears. And by the way, this is very useful because you can dynamically set like this logging level by an environment variable, for example, and if something crashes on production or you have any problem, you just set this environment variable to like a higher logging level, say like debug, and then you get more logs. So you can investigate what is going on. Yeah, so I just wanted to mention that, not that you're surprised, why is log.debug not working? Yeah, it's because we just don't have it here. So I'm going to remove it here as well. So as you can see, this format here it's like pretty simple, but maybe it's a little bit too simple. So let's maybe try to come up with a log format that is good if you are running locally. So something that is easy to read for humans, and then we will talk about how your log format should look like when you run in production, because that are two very different things. And what I want to do is I want to create my own custom log format. So for one, what I would like to have, I want to have a timestamp here. Simply because I want to know when something happens. In order to create your own log format, they have this nice method. I think it's called printf. Where is it? Here it is. Yeah. So in here, you can basically specify your own template string. So you can say, I want to have the timestamp first, then I want to have the logging level, and then I want to have the message. Okay. So, and we're just going to copy this, and yeah, that should be it. So I will just copy this, paste it in here. I'm going to name this log format. Now we do not need this label here. So this label is basically some additional metadata or that you might want to add. We're just going to remove this and we'll just say, okay, we want to have timestamp, the level, and the message. And I'm just going to take this, copy this, and instead of have this format simple, I'm going to put this in here. Okay. And now it's going to get interesting because you can see, oh, actually it's not working. And yeah, so for one, we need winston dot, you know what, let's destructure this. Format, what else? Create logger, and then transports. Because I just don't want to like write this all the time, and I'm going to put it like that and like that and like that and like that. So hopefully that now works better. Yeah, and that is fine, but you can see something is wrong here. We don't have the timestamp, and the reason is the logger does not know where to get the timestamp from. And this is something that we basically need to tell it, hey, look, we want to have like a timestamp, and please use this timestamp, or please take like a value for this timestamp, and then you can actually print it out. And here you can also see how this works. So they use this combine method. And the important thing to understand is what this combine method does. So think of like Winston like a huge buffet basically of logging options. And you can pick all the options that you want to kind of assemble your own custom logger. And with combine, you can basically say, I want to have this, and I want to have this, and I want to have this. So in here it says, I want to have a label, I want to have the timestamp, and I want to have like my custom format. And this is why this works. So I'm just going to take this, copy this, and I'm just going to go here, and I'm going to paste this in here. And I think it was format.combine. And I will delete that, and then I will say, okay, I want to have the timestamp, and then I want to have this log format, right? So now your logger knows, okay, I need to have the timestamp, or I will have the timestamp somewhere in this format here, and then it's going to print it here. Okay, so let's just save that, and let's just see how it goes. I think it needs to be format or timestamp. You know what? Actually, we could. Timestamp, and what else? Combine, and I think that's it, right? Oh yeah, printf and format. So let's just destructure this because it just gets annoying. You always have to type like format. Yeah, something like that. Okay, so now it should be at least defined. Yeah, and now you can see, okay, cool. We have like the timestamp over here. The only thing that is kind of annoying here is that we have, like, be in mind, we're currently trying to build a logger that is easy to read for humans. Like, why do we have the time zone here, right? I don't care so much like about the time zone if I run locally. Like if you run in a cluster, if you run in production, always put the timestamp, like in everywhere. Also in databases, by the way. Like never use like these local date time thing without a timestamp. Like always use the timestamp because you never know in what server time like the hardware is configured, you know, or the like VM or in whatever you're running it. Okay, cool. So I'm just going to add like some configuration option here, and I'm going to say format. And I'm going to take like a custom format that I defined here. So for example, I don't care about the milliseconds. So I'm just going to take that. Let's just see. Yeah, so now you can see it looks kind of clean. So we have the time or the date and the time. So that is not too bad. There's like one more thing that we can do. Winston offers the option to colorize things. So that means instead of just always having the same color, you can use colorize to make it a little bit easier to read. And I'm just going to show that. Colorize. You can have winston.format.colorize. And the only important thing is that this formatter must come before any other formatters where the text needs to be colored. Okay, so I'm maybe just take this. I go in here and actually, yeah, the question is now, where do we put this? It must come before any format you want to colorize. So let's try to put this here. And let's just see if we can spot a difference. Nice. So this is pretty good, right? It's kind of nice. Before it was nothing was colored, but now it's at least colored. So that's good. And you know, if it's yellow, it's a warning. If it's red, it's an error. That's nice. You know, for development, it's nice to see that. Cool. And there's one more thing I want to do, and then we're pretty much done with this dev logger here. I want to show you something. So let's say I have something like new error. Something went wrong. Okay, so if I pass this thing an error, then I don't see like the stack trace here. Yeah, maybe not ideal, right? We want to see the stack trace. You can go in here, and what you can say is, hey, look, I want to have format.errors, and I want to say stack is equal to true. So that means if I have an error, I definitely want to print like my stack trace. Yeah, and this is like a best practice more or less. And what you will see here now is that, hey, somehow it's not printing the stack trace, right? Even though we told it to. Why is that? And the answer is quite simple, because here, or like because we have like a custom log message, and in here we're only logging the message. But if it's like an error, then there is like a different object. And this one is actually called stack. So what we can do here, we can say something like stack or message, which kind of has the advantage that if you put a like an object or like an error as the first parameter inside of this logging thing, then it's going to print like the complete error out. So in case it's like an error that you're logging, then it will print out the complete error. So this is kind of nice. So yeah, you can do a lot of other things with this. You could also attach like some metadata like to your logs, which is something we haven't talked about yet. So the first message here is always like some text, but you can also attach like some metadata, meta1, meta1. Okay, and the interesting part is that you are actually, like for now at least, not going to see this in here, but it will be there. So if we were to write this data to a file, then we would actually see it. And this is also the purpose of this default metadata. So let's assume you run inside of a Kubernetes cluster and you have, I don't know, 200 microservices. Then you want to know from which service the logs are coming from. And then what you could do is you could say, okay, per default, I want to have this default metadata, so that in my log aggregator in Datadog or whatever you use, I can search for logs for this particular service. And you can add like any metadata you want. Okay, so now I think we're done with this one. I just want to talk about creating loggers in production now. The thing is, while this format here is kind of nice, and while you could certainly improve like a couple of other things here, there's a little caveat. So format like this is not very useful for production log, because like these log aggregators, they live from the fact that they can systematically analyze logs. And for that, you need like a better format. So not just one big string, but ideally use JSON logging. So when you run in production, you definitely want to use JSON logging. And this is like what we want to do. And what I'm just going to say now is I'm going to grab this thing here. I'm going to put it inside of a function. So I will just say build def logger. And I'm going to do it like that. I'm going to take this. I'm going to cut it. I'm going to paste it in here. And then I'm going to rename this file to def logger. And obviously now I need like an index.js file again. And now our thing will crash, obviously. So now we have like this function which kind of builds a def logger, and we also export this function. And in here, let's just say module.exports equals build def logger. So we are of course going to work on that now, but I'm just going to import it so that it stops yelling. Okay, and what I now want to do, instead of this def logger, I want to create a logger which you can use in production. And actually, yeah, it's not super similar, but like a little bit. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just going to grab all of this. I'm going to copy it and I'm going to paste it, and then you can see what you would do differently. So for one, you would not have like this log format, because you definitely want to log in JSON. This is the most important thing, because otherwise your log aggregator just doesn't know what to do. And you also don't need this colorize, which is even, let's leave it in and we're going to see what happens. Okay, so maybe if you run across this issue, then you know it. And in terms of timestamp, I want to have the exact timestamp with the time zone. So I'm going to delete this custom format. I definitely want to have like this errors, and the log format I just deleted. I want to have the default metadata for sure. And yeah, service is fine. Yeah, I think actually we could. Do we have that somewhere here? Yeah, let's delete this. We don't need it if you run locally. But here we need it. We can say, okay, let's also write to the console. But what I want to have is I want to have the, yeah, let's get rid of that first. I want to have JSON logging. And by the way, actually we could, okay, we're going to delete this anyway, but this one we will need. So we'll just make this a little bit, so that's a little bit more consistent here. Okay, that's fine. Oh, actually we need to return this, right? Totally forgot about that. Yeah, so return this logger. And the same thing here. But I'm going to name this build prod logger. And yeah, I think that is fine. The only thing that I definitely want is I want to have the JSON format. Okay. Okay, so we're just going to check out in a second if this is working or not. So for one, I'm going to export this method. And what you now want to do, and this is what I would always recommend, is depending on where you run, you would actually create like a different logger. That's why we created these things here in the first place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say let logger equals null. And typically you would check the node env variable. So if you run in production, then this should be production. If not, it should be development. And if it's like, if we're running in development, then I'm going to say logger equals this guy here, like this. And otherwise I'm going to say logger equals build prod logger. Okay, and then I'm going to export like the logger. Okay, there's one more thing. Per default, this node env thing here is not set. So what we need to do is we need to go to our script here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set this node env here manually. And by the way, there's a very good reason why I am doing it in that order. Because you might say, well, actually I could have checked for equals production as well. And I don't think it's a good idea. I think you should set it to development, because it could be that for whatever reason, people forget to set this env var. And what this basically does is it says, if I know for sure that I am in development because someone set this node.env variable to development, then I'm going to use the dev logger. Otherwise, so that means if the node environment is production or anything else, or even like undefined because no one said it, I'm going to build this prod logger over here. And I think that makes a lot of sense. You know, in case you just forget to build it, or in case you just forget to set it, it's still going to work. I'm going to take this, and why is that now not working? I'm just a little bit surprised here. Let's go here. Let's maybe delete this for now. Oops. Let's do it like that. Logger.info is not a function. Well, that's, oh, wow, why is it importing this? I only wanted to have that actually. It was probably some renaming issue. Build devlogger has already been declared. There's some re-importing bug. Yeah, that's the interesting part. If you change this on the fly, then the env var change might not kick in. So I'm going to restart this. And you can see we still have the old logging format. And what I'm now going to do is, instead of using this nodemon where I set the node environment variable manually, I'm just going to run node index.js. So without setting like the value. And now you can see that all of a sudden we have like JSON logging, which is good for log aggregators. So you always want to have that. But what is that here, right? It looks kind of strange. And the reason for that is if you have this colorize option, then it's going to add like additional text there so that the console knows that it should be colorized. But if you use the JSON logging, it's just going to pollute your logs. That's why you need to delete this. Let's run this index.js again. Right, and now you can see, okay, now it's no longer there, right? But now it's nice, right? You got the message, you got the level, you got the service, which is like the default metadata, which is good. And you got the timestamp with the time zone. And in here, what you can also do is, I think you can also add this meta. So any object you add here will be logged as well as metadata. And that is typically like very useful. Where is it? Yeah, you can see it here like meta1. This is typically very useful because for every field that you add in this object, the log aggregator, Datadog, or whatever you use is going to add one additional column, and then you can search by the value. Yeah, so that's it pretty much for this logging tutorial. I hope you kind of got like a useful insight in how this works. Obviously, this thing here is not perfect. There's like a lot of things you could improve, but I think it's like a good start. Yeah, just let me know what you think about this in the comments below. I think if you really want to build like a production ready service, you should definitely consider the JSON logging format when you run in production. So that's it pretty much. Thank you so much for watching. Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. If you have a question, leave me a comment below. You can also send me a tweet. So my Twitter handle is @productioncoder. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.